I'm Jonathan Whitcomb, but let me get to the confession. A few decades ago, when I was a very young man, which a friend, we'll call her Mary. But Mary told my sister that she had seen a pterodactyl just at the northern end of Allen Avenue in Altadena, California. It was a huge pterodactyl that flew up into the mountains. Mary was convinced she'd seen a pterodactyl. What did I think? I thought, oh, that girl is crazy. It's absolutely ridiculous. How could she think that she saw a giant pterodactyl that was alive and flying up into the mountains? Well, that's my confession, because a few decades later, when I was right in the middle of my investigation in this narrow branch of cryptozoology, my sister reminded me of that, and she got the phone number for this lady we'll call Mary, and I gave her a phone call. Now, by this time, I had interviewed people from all over the world, hundreds of eyewitnesses of similar things, pterodactyls of various sizes, some of them quite big. And so when I talked with Mary on the phone, I had a totally different attitude, and I believed her, even though she told me that the pterodactyl she saw flying up into the foothills in Altadena was the size of a bus. Now remember, a bus in this period of time, the 1960s, as far as I recall, there were no minibuses, but a bus was a bus. It was a regular-sized bus. Was it a pterodactyl with a wingspan of 30 to 40 feet? Sighting was in Mexico in the year 2000, near a village 15 miles southwest of Puerto Vallarta. A huge black bird-like creature came from the more mountainous region and flew toward the ocean, its total wingspan about 30 to 40 feet, unquote. This is part of an email I received from a lady living in Bristol, Rhode Island. It was sent to me on September 1st, 2004. Quote, I have seen a pterodactyl. It was the second week of October, and I was on the back deck of my house. It was a cold night, and I heard a loud whooshing noise moving in the air to my right. I saw a huge pterodactyl that circled my house 6 times and once turned its head and looked at me. By the 6th time, it was lower. It definitely was interested in me. I am not a nut. I'm a mother of 2 and work in a hospital lab. Pterodactyl? Now for a pterodactyl sighting in Brookfield, Wisconsin. Kevin was at the Elm Brook Memorial Hospital in the afternoon of September 21st, 1988, waiting for the birth of his first child. Alone in the waiting room, he looked out the window and saw something flying in and out of the clouds. Kevin soon realized it was not a plane, and he later reported to a journalist, quote, it was bigger than a full-size pickup truck, but smaller than a Piper Cub plane, unquote. Do pterodactyls eat bats? Some modern pterosaurs eat bats. In the spring of 2020, I know what I saw was 2 pterosaurs. Spring at around 5:30 in the morning, I was driving to work, and it was a black and foggy morning when I came into a very clear part of the road just before I went through a swampy area, but I saw 2 pterosaurs chasing a bat. I could see them very clearly as they were right in front of me, and I had just turned on my bright lights, as I usually do when I get to that close to the swamp, because there are no street lights along that stretch of road. I had stopped my car when I saw them and was shocked and amazed at how swift and maneuverable they were, and were working as a team to catch this rather large bat. Pterodactyls worldwide alive. On October 15th, 2002, the Anchorage Daily News in Alaska is said to have reported that people in Togiak and Manokotak, southwestern corner of Alaska, had witnessed a huge bird-like flying creature that looked like a pterodactyl. It was said to be as big as a light aircraft. Sighting number 2, firefighters in Alberta, Canada. Quote, back in the 80s, around 100 of us were kicking back on the cut line, having lunch. We were fighting fire. At one point, we spotted a big bird coming down the cut line, and it was at a distance where we all thought it was an eagle. but the closer it got, the bigger it got. At that point, you could hear a pin drop. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. It flew about 70, maybe 80 feet above us, and at that point, my curiosity went to total fear. If this thing decided he wanted one of us, it would have been that easy. That's how big it was. It looked to be 20 feet across at the wings. The wings reminded me of a bat. The head had a long beak with a big point in the back of its head, and it had a tail as well. It didn't have one feather on it. When it flapped its wing, it was so smooth and carried a long distance with just one flap of its wings. This was in northern Alberta. No roads for hundreds of miles around us. It even hung its head down and looked at us as it flew by. In the words of the eyewitness, I saw one in 2003, Kuna, Idaho. I was at my brother's house. My brother and I were standing in his driveway. As I looked to the south, I saw the enormous creature gliding through the air, wingspan 25 to 30 feet. Gliding very slow, it was absolutely silent. Dark brown, no feathers, wings had claws on the outer edges, feet with claws. As it got closer, its head cocked to the side, and it flapped its wings to stay at glide, maybe 35 to 40 feet off the rooftops, soaring above this subdivision. It was so close I could have thrown a rock at it and hit it. My niece stepped out the front door. My brother and I yelled at her to go back in. This creature could easily fly off with 250 pounds, making most anyone a meal. Pterodactyl sighting or Ropen in West Virginia. I believe the following potential modern pterosaur sighting has never before been produced in a YouTube video. If I'm mistaken or forgot, it's sorry, but we now cover it here anyway. Many years ago, one night in West Virginia, a father and his daughter and son were in an outdoor hot tub. I now quote the words of the boy. Quote, "My sister was counting stars. She spots this giant winged creature flying across the sky. It was way up, and its wings were flapping slowly. It was glowing." Unquote. This was a couple miles from Point Pleasant, West Virginia in October of 2014. 17. Quote, "I am a mother of 4 and am 32 years old. I live on the Welsh border, Whitchurch. I am in the best of health mentally. I do not take any form of narcotics nor prescription pills, and I do not drink. I went into the garden. We live in a wildlife reserve which has an abundance of birds and wildlife, including eagles and hawks, heron, geese, swans, etc. It's usual for them to fly overhead, and I see them. You hear their calls and get familiar with sounds. On this particular morning, I heard a very strange screech. I had never heard it before, and it was very loud. I could hear it getting closer. Nothing prepared me for what I actually saw. I saw 2 pterodactyl flying side by side. It had a giant-sized beak, and the wings had no feathers." Unquote. The lady did research, but no bird was like the 2 flying things she encountered. In Arizona, one morning in October of 1945, 2-year-old Mike McDonald was playing in his yard with the family dog. Without warning, the boy and the dog were gone. When the family couldn't find him, police, ranchers, and farmers joined in the search. The next morning, Joe Mazie and the 2-year-old's father, Ed McDonald, were on horseback searching an area 15 miles from where the boy disappeared. Joe saw a dog, and as the men got closer, Ed recognized his family dog. It was next to a dugout hole, and when the men looked into the 2-foot-wide opening, there was little Mike McDonald, sleeping. Aside from a small cut on his foot, the boy had no injuries. What a relief! What happened? Keep with us, and we'll get into the answer and why little Mike was found 15 miles from home, and why he was in a dugout hole, and why the cut was on his foot rather than on another part of his body, and why the family dog was still alive, and why it was still with the boy. It was a number of weeks ago that I got this email from a man who'd been in China. This in 2007, this is quoting, in 2007 while traveling in Xinjiang, China, near Urumqi, saw two large pterosaurs on the highway in front of the vehicle I was traveling in. The two creatures were eating what appeared to be a wild baby camel. And this is not all desert. The person that's reporting this to me was the only foreigner, non-Chinese person there. They pushed off with their front limbs and turned into wings, so apparently they didn't notice the wings until they pushed up and flew up into the air, and then the wings took over. Quote, with one or two swoops of the wings, they easily cleared the fences and flew away. The wingspan in both was more than 20 feet, and they stood about 5.5 to 6.5 feet tall. But why were Frank and his two cousins in danger while fishing? And what group of people are not fishing when they're attacked? And how can those flying creatures be pterosaurs? Aren't they all extinct, like dinosaurs? We will get to each of the answers, beginning with Frank's encounter in 1984, before getting into details on his sighting that night. Here's the point. That big flying creature was not trying to catch one of the three men for its dinner. It was a territorial dispute. It was most likely protected against fishing territory.
2, 3 o'clock in the morning, it's really catfishing time. So to steer a line, we used to get a tire, and we used to light a tire on fire. And this black shadow goes past us, and we looked at each other and said, what was that? And I don't know. That black shadow comes straight down on top of us, very prehistoric. It was a pterodactyl. I'd say 15 feet, 20 feet, it was just hovering on it. And we started screaming like that. So we had our fishing rods, 7-foot fishing rods, and we started whacking at it. And it would come down and try to pick us up with its talons.
Frank assumed that the flying creature was trying to carry away one of them, but it was very likely a defense of the animal's territory. It probably was catching fish from that river at night.
What it would do, it would come up to like 15, 20 foot, just out of the reach of our ugly stick, and just hover there flat. And then it would come down, and when it came down, it would open its claws up and try to come and pick us up. And when it came down at us, we would hit it, and we would hit it like the lower body and at its feet. It came down at us at least 12, 15 times.
Notice Frank's estimate for how many times that creature flew down closer to those men, at least 12 or 15 times. If it wanted to eat one of them, it would have dived through those fishing poles and grabbed a human, or it would have given up much sooner to look for an easier meal like fish. Now consider an attack on a fisherman years earlier in the Southwest Pacific. Do modern pterosaurs ever attack humans? For most of those flying creatures, never. But beware of the large exceptional ones, those rare pterodactyls that might, on occasion, attack someone somewhere on the planet. About 150 miles north of Amboy Island is Manus Island. In this area, the natives call the Ropen core. But the native man who killed a core eventually died from the injuries he received from the animal. The native apparently was defending himself from continuous attack from the flying creature. This is a book written by Fred Silcock. I was fascinated by what I learned in it about barn owls, Tyto alba, for example. Barn owls found worldwide, in particular in Australia. Well, the author sent me a free copy of his book. Some barn owls, at least under certain circumstances, not all the time, and that could be rare, and it could be that not all barn owls do this, but they have a bioluminescence that apparently they can control when they're very... So let's get to Marfa. Over the years, I occasionally get a sighting report from Texas, apparent modern pterosaur. in various parts of Texas. And occasionally, not as often, I'll get a report of a strange flying light that the eyewitness thought may be related to these glowing Ropens that might have the bioluminescent glow. And in at least one case I can remember, the eyewitness in Texas said he saw both the glow and the shape, the actual wings of a flying creature. So the concept that Ropens have a bioluminescent glow is not restricted to Papua New Guinea or the Southwest Pacific or Australia, anything like that. Not at all. There's at least one species worldwide that still can glow. And my associates and I believe that this is related to the ancient traditions about fire-breathing dragons. But we'll get in that to another video. But tonight we're going to concentrate more on morpholites. What is this? I had one of the largest newspapers in the country, and we went through this the other day with newspaper articles about modern pterosaurs and morpholites, And a modern dragon almost everywhere? Is it a bat-like bird or a Ropen? It does not look like those two pictures. Two Ropens, one chased by a small bird, according to the lady who recorded them with her cell phone in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is reality. Detailed image stabilization and slowing down the motion. That reveals why this flying creature is unlikely to be any bird. Notice the complex wing flapping, unlike the simpler wing flapping of crows.
As I was traveling north, it appeared over my shoulder in the windshield here of the car, and it was flying in this direction. And it immediately drew my attention because its wings were not flapping like a bird's would. It was rolling kind of like a stingray in the ocean.
Pterosaur sighting in New Mexico. Ropen seen by 3 men. In eastern New Mexico, while driving on a highway, the 3 men saw a pterosaur fly right in front of their car, maybe less than 200 feet away. 2 of the eyewitnesses, Parsons and Kenzie, testified on a video on the YouTube channel Modern Explorer. Jason Kenzie said, quote, "I know it wasn't a stork. I know storks. I know the great blue heron. It looked like a giant bat. That leather look, the little hands on the wings," unquote. Those 2 eyewitnesses also said that the tail was long and at the end of the tail was a, quote, spade shape, unquote.